Okay, well, so when Rocky invited me here, I thought, what's a good topic? I went with my old favorite topic, which is directional control problems on the step. And I used to say that's the most important seaplane topic that nobody knows about. It's been a factor in an awful lot of accidents over the years, and it's something that you can manage really well if you know about it and how to manage it, and that's what I was going to talk about today. And it might not be the obscure topic it used to be. It seems like it's kind of getting out there a little bit, but it's kind of worth talking about. So what I had in mind today, I want to talk about, first of all, well, the issue is that seaplanes, when they ride nose low on the forward end of the step, they've got a directional stability problem. And so I want to talk about some of the situations where you see that, where that has been a factor in accidents, and then talk about just the technical nature of what leads to that seaplane characteristic and kind of how it works. And then after that, just give some practical tips for how to manage that to your advantage. And anyway, so to start with, somebody did us a great favor a number of years ago and caught an accident on film. And you might have seen this before. It's the movie The Motherload. The movie's been around for a little while. And they didn't intend to get this accident. They didn't intend to have this accident, of course, but they got it on film. So here he is coming in, a little bit of a low elevator, it's a little bit of a glassy water lake. He's a little bit low on the pitch attitude. He doesn't land totally flat, but as soon as he does, he totally loses directional control. He ends up upside down, but it's clear that what led to the accident was just losing control of his yaw. And this video shows it one more time in kind of slow motion. And see, it's not an extreme nose down attitude, but it kind of pitches him forward, and then he just can't keep it straight. So that's and then just goes bad from there. But anyway, that's kind of an issue in seaplane. So I wanted to so that's what the talk's about. So I'm going to go on. So next slide. Actually, let's go back one. Yeah. So that issue of having directional control problems, that's something that you're particularly vulnerable to it, or it comes up and it causes problems in these scenarios, among others. But glassy water is one of them, and tailwind landings, step taxi, turns, certain flap and CG configurations, short landings, I'll talk about that later. But anything that either puts you initially a little bit flat on the step or drags you, pulls you flatter on the step can cause this problem. So what's going on with the seaplanes is, I'll just explain yaw stability. But before I do that, I'm going to back up and start with explaining how it works, reviewing how it works for land planes. I know everybody knows this, but just to review the terms, let me just bear with me for a second. So for land planes, we got just two distinct kinds of stability. We got nose wheel and tail wheel, and the airplane's got a pivot point and pivots on the main wheels. It's got a center of gravity. In the case of the tail wheel airplane, that's behind it. The definition of stability is how an airplane reacts to disruption. If it reacts to disruption by increasing that disruption, that's negative, which is what we have to do, because if you get a little bit crooked, the inertia acting on the CG wants to keep on going straight, and it pulls it around the pivot point and acts to, it wants to ground move. But the nose wheel airplane is the opposite. The CG forward to the pivot point, if it gets a little bit crooked, that the CG's inertia wants to pull it straight, pull it over, behind it straight, and straighten itself out, which is self-correcting, which is the definition of positive stability. So for real planes, we've got one or two types of stability depending on the particular airplane, and that's just defined by the design of the airplane, never changes, right? So like I said, I just wanted to kind of review those terms to show how it is on seaplanes. So seaplanes, how's it work? Well, you don't have that exactly defined pivot point. The water is acting across a certain area on the floats. And really that it ends up having a pivot point because all those forces average out. Center pressure is a term I've heard, but it's essentially just all those forces just average out to act as if they're acting at one spot. And that pivot point can act across a little bit of a certain range. And that range can be a little bit forward or after the center of gravity. But that actual location of the pivot point changes according to pitch. So we've got a distinct stability characteristic on the wheel plane. We've got a little bit of a spectrum for the seaplane, and if the pitch is high, that pivot point moves aft behind the CG, and it's stable, behaves like it has a characteristic of nose wheel plane. The pitch can be such that pivot point is right at the CGs, get neutral stability, and you can actually pitch forward and move that forward to where it's you get the tail wheel situation there. So make sure I don't miss anything in my notes here, but yeah. So you don't have a particular stability characteristic. You've got a whole range that you can experience. Now, what's that mean? Well, it means a couple things. It means, number one, that it can change if you're not paying attention to it. So you can be flying an airplane that handles really well. It's positively stable 1 minute, maybe it's, but then the handling can totally change. You can find yourself in another situation where it's unstable, and that's something that if you don't understand that, if you don't realize how that works, it can catch you by surprise. Like I say, you just kind of go from, the airplane can just totally change its personality a little bit. Well, what else does it mean? It means that this variable nature of the airplane's stability characteristic, well, that's an opportunity that you can actually control its stability. You can make it stable or unstable by what you do. So as you vary the pitch, you can actually change one of the fundamental flight characteristics of the airplane, and that's kind of an opportunity. It's because here you're stuck in one airplane or another, and here you can move the stability characteristic around the spectrum at will as you desire to do so. So anyway, knowing about this means that you've got something that you can really use to your advantage. And an example of that, well, consider the wheel plane again. So imagine that you're in a tailwheel airplane and you're getting a little crooked and the airplane starts to ground loop. Imagine that you could just magically transform that airplane into a Cessna 172 and then it would just straighten itself out all by itself and take care of your problem. Well, that's exactly what you can do in a seaplane. If you find yourself on the forward end of the step, and if that stability problem is causing any problems, if it's doing anything you don't like, well, you can just get rid of the stability problem and turn yourself into a stable airplane. So that is kind of how that works. But those scenarios I talked about before, where people have had problems losing control of the yaw, most of those, there's a lot of accidents associated with each of those scenarios, and most of those could have been prevented had somebody had a good working knowledge of how to control that stability, when they get into an unstable situation, how they can get out of it, how they can reverse it. So anyway, that's, like I say, that's kind of the spectrum of stability that you can experience in seaplanes. And I'm going to add one more part of it. So there's a full stability spectrum. Nose high on the positive end. It's kind of, you get normal nose wheel behavior out of a seaplane. Neutral, you get no neutral stability. you start to work the forward end of the step, you start to get negative stability. I call that kind of normal, the normal tail wheel range. You know, that's something, well, you want to be careful when you're there, but it's not a big deal. You know, you used to managing that in tail wheel airplanes, so you know, there's hazards that could exist in that area, but they can easily be managed. Well, if you get so far forward, then you get into, let's call it super negative stability, where it's just, the stability is so great that there's just no controlling it. That no matter what you do, there's no controlling it at all. And that, of course, you know, the normal tail wheel area, we spend some time in that under normal circumstances, that's fine. But this is what we need to totally avoid and always stay. That's what the guy in the Beaver in that clip, he got into a place where there was just no recovering from that. He was just so far forward on the step that there was nothing that he could do. And let's see. I just got some notes just to make sure I don't miss any points here. So the positive stability, that's why we land seaplanes nose up and why we slide out nose up. Here, the tail wheel area, you know, we can, so that has a potential to be a problem, but it's not always a problem, but there's we can strain that area inadvertently. Sometimes where that causes problems, you know, people are doing step turns and if they just kind of accidentally strain in that area. There's other times when we have good reason to be on the front side of the step. And it's just kind of part of what we do every day, you know. Glassy water landings, we tend to kind of touch down on the little bit flatter attitude on the front side of the step. But we can also get pulled onto the front of the step. Anything, if we land anything that has drag, that has extra drag, we'll pitch the airplane forward, and it can pull us from a more moderate attitude into a little farther forward attitude where we get on that front side. So I listed the accident scenarios before, the places where I see people having problems with this. So yeah, one of the step taxiing, step turns, you got a lot going on, and it's easy to just let the airplane stray into a forward pitch attitude. So that's kind of always that's the hazard. Or that's just something to kind of pay attention to on step taxiing. And glassy water, that's kind of a natural setup for problems because the smooth water's got a lot of drag, and since we're keeping flying speed on the approach, we tend to touch down a little flatter attitude than usual, and that combined with all that drag of the smooth water likes to pitch the airplane forward, and it can pull us in that area. Flaps and CG also have an effect on pitch, and I had a guy a long time ago, you know, like some of the Cessnas can be pretty forward CG on floats if you're empty. And I knew a guy, he said, I'm just having trouble with my 185, you know, when I'm flying it by myself, it just feels terrible on landing. It just wants to, you know, stub the front of the floats and everything, and I just can't do good landings when I'm empty like that. I said, well, what are you using for flaps? He said, well, I use 40 flaps for everything. I said, well, we'll try half flaps, because, you know, so half flaps pitch you up a little bit, you know, it raises the pitch attitude at the stall a little bit. And anyway, he did that, and the next time I saw him, he said, oh, that was great, totally solved the problem. But that's, you know, so you get forward airplanes, you know, loaded forward, sometimes with a lot of flaps, and it just tends to make everything flat and put you in the tail wheel range there. So anyway, so this is all diagrams and theories. It all makes sense, huh? But really, ultimately, flying it's not really an intellectual exercise, it's just kind of a matter of going out and doing it, and I always say while instructing that I like to think about these topics a little bit as background information, but when it comes to flying, I like to just be able to do it without thinking and just internalize these concepts to the point where you're just going out and making use of them, right? So that's what I do in my instructing. Everybody I do a SEAPLANE rating with, I kind of point this out, and I do a few things to kind of get a little bit of hands-on experience with the concept so that people can, you know, just develop a working knowledge and operational use of this, so that managing this issue kind of comes naturally instead of having to think about it. And so one thing I do on a rating, I just want to internalize this through a little bit of hands-on exposure. One thing that I do on a rating, for the sake of doing this, is we'll do a step turn, and I like to have a kind of a calm day where there's no wind, so don't get confused with any other effects, weather vaning. But establish myself in a step turn, and I'm flat. I'll tell the other guy, well, just keep your hands and feet on the control with me, and then once established in a step turn, the dashed line is where it would keep going if left alone. I point out I'm not gonna move my feet at all. I'm gonna leave the rudders perfectly still, and I'm just gonna change the pitch a little bit and push the pitch forward a little bit. And the airplane, with no input from the rudders, the turn tightens. Pull the pitch back a little bit, and the turn the turn rate decreases. And it's a really good demonstration. I demonstrate first. I have somebody else, just play with that and establish a turn, pitch forward, and you can pitch forward until it starts to feel a little bit precarious, and then pull back, and it'll just totally straighten itself out. But I like that demonstration because I just want to highlight that relationship. I also play around with it early in my seaplane career, I kind of started, I just play around with this concept in other circumstances, just for fun, just kind of gratuitous. But used to fly beaver out of the Juneau Boat Harbor and touch down and kind of step turn towards the boat harbor entrance, and I do it just like that. Once I'd start the step turn, then I just steer it with the pitch. I leave the rudders totally still, and I just nudge forward to tighten the turn, nudge back, and you can totally adjust your rate of turn to steer the airplane like that. Like I said, it's just a for fun thing, but it just kind of makes it that relationship makes it a natural thing that you're actively managing that relationship in a practice situation just for fun.
So, are you talking about only turning left, or because of the?
Yep, either direction. I just happen to draw it that way, but it happens either direction. So, once you've established a turn, you without moving the rudder from that point, then the pitch will alter the relationship of your pinpoint there. Yep. Okay. Anyway, and anybody who's instructing in seaplanes, this is an incredibly useful thing in instructing, because when you're instructing, you've got somebody who's kind of figuring out how it all works. They're kind of bouncing off the edges of the envelope a little bit, and knowing that you can always deal with that instability under any circumstances allows you to be effective at letting somebody kind of sort things out in instructional scenario. It gives you some good confidence instructing that you can always. It's very, very easy to get things back in the well-behaved range should you need to. Anyway, so that's so. Kind of to conclude, kind of went through a few things there, but the main points are just the difference between how that works for floats and wheels, and I guess maybe if I was going to articulate the main points to take away here, it's just realize there's how that stability functions, how that flight characteristic functions in the wheelplanes and seaplanes. we do spend some time in the forward end of the step. There's a lot of things we do where we end up just being a little bit on the forward end of the step, and that's perfectly normal, but we do want to be, you know, we do want to know how to bring it back onto the back side of the step, into the stable area should we need to, and kind of be poised to do that. And realize that anything that exposes to high drag on the step, especially high drag on landing, that pulls us forward into that unstable forward area of the step. Tailwinds being the big one, and then we always want to manage our pitch so that we especially preemptively work to avoid being pulled extra far into the really unstable range where we can't control the airplane. Like I said, this is why we land nose up. Sometimes I'll ask somebody, well, why do we land nose up? And if every once in a while somebody said, well, you don't want to stub the toe and just flip the airplane over. Well, I don't think it's possible to stub the toe and flip the airplane straight over, except for an amphib landing maybe. But that's, the issue, the reason we land straight up, the drag feels uncomfortable, but it's not going to flip straight over. It's going to lose control of the yaw, just like we saw on that video. The end result is going to be the same. The end result is going to be, we're going to be flipped over upside down, but it's not going to get there in a straightforward way. So this is really, I just consider this an absolutely fundamental topic in seaplane safety, just how the airplane behaves as a matter of pitch attitude on the step. And let's see. And this is not an entirely bad place here working on the forward end of the step. Can also, I actually make use of that to my advantage, step taxiing sometimes to make the airplane nimble. If I'm step taxiing, maybe the weather banding is kind of opposing my turn, I can just nudge it a little bit forward and make it more responsive. Stability is, we tend to think of positive stability as an advantage, but negative stability has an advantage too. The Wright brothers thought about this. The Wright brothers designed their airplanes to be kind of neutrally stable because they thought stability is defeating the pilot's inputs. It is contrary to maneuverability, so they didn't care for the idea of stability. And anyway, so there's a lot of different kinds of areas of flying where if you want to make the airplane a little bit more nimble, more responsive, you can make it a little less stable, and that's something that you can do here too. But anyway, if you just have I guess the point is have a good working knowledge of the whole range there. Okay, so getting back to practical things, away from the theoretical, back to the practical. Over the course of my career, I've seen a lot of accidents in these particular situations. And so should probably just leave you with some concrete tips for how to negotiate these everyday things that we find ourselves doing, and with this topic in mind. Okay, so glassy water. Mentioned that a couple times. Smooth water, high drag pulls us forward, a little flatter attitude on approach, given that we're touching down at flying speed. So what I do for glassy water is, one thing I do partial flaps, usually depending on the airplane, but most airplanes I use a little bit less flaps on a glassy water landing than I use on a normal landing, and that's for that exact reason, because flaps have a pitch influence. And for real planes, real plane guys tend to think about flaps as something that you use to reduce the stall speed and maybe increase your descent angle. That's kind of what flaps are good for in real planes. obviously reducing the stall speed is an important thing in seaplanes too, but the wheelplane guys tend to think about the fact that you add flaps and you have to trim for it. That's just kind of a nuisance side effect. Well, for me, I think about the pitch influence that you get from flaps. I think of that as something that I can really use to my advantage, or at least use that as a consideration in how I do things, because pitch is so important in seaplanes, and if flaps have an effect on pitch, then I want to use the flaps in a way to get the pitch that I want for a seaplane. In the case of glass and water, that means using a little bit less flaps. So if I do glass and water, well, like a Cessna, the Cessnas that go to 40 degrees flaps, if I use full flaps on glass and water, then it's just going to be that much of a lower pitch attitude as I'm doing my 1.1 stall speed approach, right? Another thing on glassy water is I pay particular attention to attitude on the glassy water approach. The classic way of teaching glassy water is fly the speed, keep 1.1 the stall speed or whatever, just focus on that speed. Well, the airspeed and the vertical speed, they've got a little bit of time lag. Well, don't forget to kind of keep your attitude, cross-check your attitude with that, So, sure, I'm kind of looking at the speed, making sure I don't get too slow, certainly, but I'm also just, kind of making sure it looks right out the window, that it looks like it's going to be a good attitude to touchdown. The last thing about glassy water that I consciously do in my own flying is when I touch down, that glassy water does pull you forward, and I want to manage that. I don't want to let that glassy water just pull the airplane forward. Well, it's a little bit delicate because I'm kind of poised to touch down. As soon as it touches down, I want to ease the elevator back to keep the pitch from going forward there. I don't want to jerk it back to the point that I'm lift back up over water that I can't see. That's not where I want to be, of course, but nor do I want to let that pitch creep forward. So for me, the touchdown on a glassy water landing has always been kind of a very delicate point in the maneuver, because once it touches down, I want to prevent it from going any farther forward without yanking it back in the air. And but anyway, so that's by kind of by attending to those particular items on a glassy water landing, that'll keep you from getting too far forward on the step. So the tailwind landing, that's another one. That's there's been a lot of accidents over the years with tailwind landings, and I know there are a couple. It goes back a few years ago by now in Juneau, I think a couple in Ketchikan, and I just totally caught people by surprise. They're just doing, getting caught up in the rush of the day and trying to cut corners, expedite things, and land, and next thing you know, they just lose control of the airplane. But the issue there is higher water speed. You touch down with higher water speed, and on touchdown you experience more drag, pitches the airplane forward, takes it into the front side of the step. Practical tips for dealing with that situation. Well, I avoid tailwinds on principle to start with whenever I can. I will, as a habit, I always will go out of my way to avoid tailwinds. I don't think about saving time with working with tailwinds. However, that's not something you can always do. But there's a time and place to deal with tailwind. There are certain reasons to deal with tailwinds. I try to avoid them, but I'm not saying that you have to avoid them all the time. So if you do find a situation where it makes sense to work with a tailwind, be careful with it. Be very careful with it, and just realize that this is an issue, and be poised to manage your pitch accordingly. And tailwinds up, so sometimes if I have to take a tailwind, I'll just slow it down in the flare, land maybe a little higher pitch up than normal. Maybe I'll maybe I won't use full flaps in the Cessna. And the other thing to realize is that there is a limiting tailwind that is not going to be safe no matter what you do. So there's a, you don't have to get very high on tailwinds to get to a tailwind that's so high that you'll touch down, you'll just experience so much drag with that higher touchdown rudder speed that it is going to pull you too far forward, and you're just not gonna be able to control the airplane. And where that is depends on the airplane, and you can feel it when you work tailwind. You can kind of feel what you've got, how much ability you have to prevent the pitch over. And 10 knots is an awful lot in most seaplanes, and probably 15 knots, most float planes, most single-engine float planes, probably most 15 knots is getting into the total disaster territory. 10 knots you can probably work. The Grummins do better. The Grummins, you can just look at a rod there that they can handle a little bit more. But anyway, I avoid tailwinds whenever possible for this reason. And if but I'm very judicious about how I accept tailwinds. And like I say, for single-engine float planes, probably 10 knots, certainly 15 knots is starting to get pretty hazardous. Okay, so flaps and CG. Talked about how that can bring us into the unstable range, and talked about the guidance Cessna 185. So I think about, like I was just saying, I think about flaps in terms of their pitch influence, and how I select a flap setting. It's a matter of compromise, because I want the stall speed reduction I can get, but I also don't want any more forward pitch than I need to have. And so those are kind of two competing considerations that I consider for a particular airplane. And the Cessnas have got something that's kind of neat. The Cessnas, most of the lift occurs in the first half of the flaps, and first half of the flap travel, and then beyond the first half of the flap travel, your 30 and 40 settings, you don't hardly get any additional lift, but you do get more drag, and you get more pitch down. So for the Cessnas, half flaps is kind of a good compromise among those competing considerations, because you're getting nearly all the benefit of the stall speed reduction and the reduction in touchdown speed, but you're not getting any more of the pitch down than necessary. You get some pitch down with the first half flaps, but the second half is all pitch down with no benefit. And now you know what? Actually, I don't mean to say no benefit, because there's people who like to do full flaps in the Cessnas all the time, and I'm not arguing with that at all. If that's something that you like for whatever reason, and I do a lot of that too. And if you like that because you like the way it decelerates or whatever, if you have any reason that you like full flaps and Cessnas, I'm not arguing with that at all. That's totally reasonable. But if you have times when you need to manage the pitch, when managing the pitch is a consideration, then realize that full flaps is maybe not helping you out with that anymore. Short landings, I was just kind of looking at all the scenarios I've seen in the course of my career where people have lost directional control, and the short landings, when I was flying in Southeast, we used to do this. We'd land in some coves, and there were one-way coves, and you touch down, and you couldn't touch down until you were inside the cove because of the ocean swell, and then you'd have to get stopped pretty short. And Elephant Cove was one of those places. And what we do, what people would do, they'd touch down, and then they'd kind of pitch the airplane over to access that bow drag to slow it down. Well, Beaver's such a good flying airplane that works fine, And, but it does bring you into the unstable territory, right? Well, one guy, he did that, he pitched over, and the airplane just began a slow turn to the beach, and full rudder. He couldn't straighten it out, and it just went, went into the beach, drove up on the rocks. Nobody got hurt, no big deal. But he just, nothing you could do with the rudder was going to help that. And that was a very, very easy thing to fix, by just pulling back when it straightened it out. So that's what, I mean, I'm not recommending that technique, but people come up with various things that end up on the front end of the step for various reasons, and there are good reasons to work the front end of the step. And I always realize that you can always get back on the after end of the step and solve your problems if you have any problems. And anyway, so with that, having talked about the mechanism a little bit and exactly what goes on here, let's finish up by watching that one more time. And so now that we're seeing it one more time, just kind of consider exactly what's going on. And Alex pretty nose down, but he gets it flattened out. And his touchdown attitude is not terrible, but it gets pulled down. You see that at the moment of touchdown, he gets pulled forward. And that particular attitude he touched down at, that was on the low side. Maybe if it had been on choppy water, maybe if it had been, the density altitude gives you higher touchdown speed as well. That adds a little bit of water drag. And anyway, that guy got himself in a bad situation. Like I say, got himself in that kind of extreme unstable territory where there's just nothing to do about that. So anyway, yeah, so that's all I had. But I was going to leave some time for discussion and questions. Anybody have any questions?
You've convinced us.
Yeah. Well, it's a topic that's once you know about it, and once you have some hands-on experience controlling it and seeing how the airplane responds, to pitch attitudes on the step. And I think it's a great tool to be able to just have an intuitive understanding of this topic, so that you can just make use of it when something's in the course of your day-to-day flying. So, all right. Well, thanks for coming.